We're seeing central banks like India, China, and others buying a lot of gold at the moment.
Yes.
The reason they're doing that is because if something breaks in the financial system of the world as it is, it'll be time for a new global monetary system. And those who have the most gold will get a seat at the table and possibly call the shots.
I'm Lynette Zang, Chief Market Analyst here at ITM Trading, a full-service physical gold and silver dealer. Today on this special edition of Coffee with Lynette, I have a wonderful guest, Clive Thompson. Now, he is from Switzerland and he's now retired, but he worked for 47 years in the wealth management industry. He's spent this career in working for Swiss private banks, advising wealthy families on strategies for preserving and growing their financial wealth, as well as the related legal, tax, residence, devolution aspects of wealth planning. Despite being retired for more than a year, Clive is actively keeping abreast of the financial market developments and discussing investments and asset deployment on a daily basis. He believes the current fiat-based financial system is drawing to a close, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Clive, thank you so much for being here. You know, I like to start with the new guests and ask them, I know that you retired roughly a year ago, and a lot of people in your position would just kind of take it easy and relax. But you actually seem to have started a completely new chapter in your life. So can I ask you why you do all of these things that you do and spend your time with the market still?
Well, I spent 47 years in wealth management and looking after, broadly speaking, the wealth of rich people. But like a doctor, when you retire, you carry on doing the same thing as you always did, but you do it for free. So I'm still
Yes.
advising. I hate to use the word advising, but let's say talking with a lot of people, people I know and people I don't know, and I don't charge any money for it. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it. It keeps my mind active. And I keep my eye on the markets and which way the world is going.
Oh, so that must keep you really busy these days because there's a lot going on. But also, you know, I saw an article that you talked about recently on the Brit Coin coming. So Great Britain's CBDC. Can you elaborate on that and what you think that actually means and whether or not they're going to get adoption?
So Britain is quite advanced in terms of bringing in the central bank digital currency, otherwise known as the CBDC. Where they've got to, they're passing the Financial Services Bill 2023. It's just at the committee stage at the moment, going through the House of Lords, and then it will get the royal assent, and that will give the Treasury the power to make various rules related to digital currencies, specifically the CBDC. We also have a paper from the Bank of England, which it's several hundred pages long, it's more than 100 pages long, in which they describe the CBDC and how it's going to operate and all the things which will go into it. Obviously, it's a consultation paper, so it's not finalized yet. And they do say no decision has yet been made. But I think it's clear it will happen. Yeah. And if you look at the job postings on LinkedIn for the Treasury and for the Bank of England, you'll find that both of them have various job openings for people who can be policy consultants and so forth on the CBDC. So there is no doubt it's coming. And as the paper describes it, the proposal is there'll be a lot of checks and balances in there. They're going to keep cash, as we know it, going. So they say, until nobody wants the cash. They are going to have secrecy rules so the government cannot know who has got what or what they're doing with it. but it won't be totally secret because the monitoring of what you will do will be outsourced to financial institutions. So it won't be the Bank of England monitoring you nor the government, but they will outsource that monitoring for money laundering and anti-crime reasons. So you will be monitored. It just won't be by the government as it stands if it comes to pass in the way it's proposed by the consultation paper.
Well, one of the things I thought was really interesting is, that you were talking about in there. I mean, first of all, no, they're not going to do away with cash because then people are going to know that something is different and they don't really want that. But you stated that they created a whole new currency and that could run alongside everything else that they're already doing.
So there is no doubt the CBDC is not the same currency as the British pound. It will be one-to-one and freely convertible from your bank deposit to the central bank currency and back again. But they are, to all intents and purposes, two different things, which will look like the same thing, just like dollars and cents are effectively the same thing. The important point about it being two different things is that at any moment in time, they can actually make them different things which are not one-to-one. Right. So if the economy is starting to get into trouble because everybody's bringing their pounds home and trying to do something bad with the economy, they can simply bottleneck how much you can move into CBDCs and run the economy on the CBDC without worrying about the old legacy currency, which will now be starting to wither away. Mm-hmm. Because the minute they bottleneck you and say you can't freely put money in and out of CBDCs, which is what you'll be spending in the shops, people are going to panic a little bit and want to do it. And then, of course, they'll close the door. And you'll find that the old currency starts to be valued at a discount to the new currency, the new CBDC. Now, there's no proposal that will happen by the government or the Treasury or the Bank of England at the moment, but it will make it a lot easier for us to have a currency reset, i.e., there's a huge sell-off in the government bond market. Britain can't finance itself, for example, and they have to shut the door and start again with a new currency. If that was to happen, and it's only a question of time before something like this does happen somewhere, and if it happens somewhere, it'll be in a large Western economy. It'll be replicated very, very quickly around the world. People will panic everywhere in the world. So if it happens, the benefit to the UK government would be that they now have a new currency on which the economy is running and an old currency on which the economy is not running. And therefore, the old government debt will be in a currency which they don't have to worry about. So they'll be able to print it out of existence to pay off the national. Well, they won't pay off the national debt. They'll just keep printing it and printing and printing until everyone realizes it's worth absolutely nothing. And people, the government of China and whoever else has got the government debt says, well, no point in paying us anything because you're paying us with a confetti.
Right. So that's a really interesting concept, and it kind of goes along with how you catch a wild boar by just closing all the avenues of escape by getting them comfortable in the circumstance. But so you think that they would run parallel, but you would not be able to use the old pounds to purchase as a tool of barter? They would just sort of be an accounting tool?
Well, when the CBDC comes, under the plans as proposed, you'll be able to use your cash in your wallet, your cash in your bank, or the CBDC.
Right.
You'll have basically three choices. So you'll use your credit card, which is your bank's money. You'll use your cash in your pocket, your pound notes. Well, they don't have £5 notes anymore. The £5 notes. Or you'll be using the CBDC wallet, which will probably be on your phone like that. Mm-hmm. And the shopkeeper won't initially care. But over time, I suspect that cash will gradually fall into disuse. Now, I'm not saying that people want that, but it kind of happened already in Sweden. So it's kind of the direction of travel when you bring digital things in. So you'll now be faced with the choice of using your bank's money or your CBDCs. It'll be very easy to dictate that at a certain point, everything has to be in CBDCs for paying your taxes, earning your salary, paying your rent, buying things in the shop, or whatever. And probably all contracts will have to become in the new CBDC. Now, that's not the plan they have at the moment, but it will be possible because we'll effectively have two things.
Well, actually, it'd be a bit like... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it's vaguely similar to what Britain did in 1971 or America did in 1933. In 1971, we had 240 pennies to the pound, and then it suddenly became 100 pennies to the pound. And in 1933, I think it was, in the USA, we had an ounce of gold was worth $20, and then a year later, it was worth $35.
Right.
In other words, it was the same thing up until 1933, and then it was two different things.
Yeah, it's amazing how you get people to just kind of volunteer it. And it brings me back to a piece that the IMF did in 2018, or 15 rather, breaking below the lower zero bound, where they talked about wanting distance between their policy and how it is introduced to the public, and using the retail public to introduce it to the general public. So they would put a fee on, which we already have, frankly, on cash deposits and cash withdrawals. And then if you go to the store says, okay, if you use this, it'll cost this much. If you use cash, it'll cost this much. So in that way, they get people to volunteer going cashless without them even really realizing that they're giving up all of their choices. And then once they do, I think it's an interesting concept because usually hyperinflation is what takes care of that huge amount of debt. Have you been able to find anywhere what they're going to use to justify the creation of those CBDCs? Because that's been a bit elusive.
Well, the plan is that they will be freely convertible from one to the other. So it'll be just like the old British pound. In other words, in God we trust, or whatever you like. Obviously, it's backed by absolutely nothing at all. But as long as people have confidence that the currency has value, that'll be fine. But the problem will arise if we suddenly have a crisis, such as the one we had, I think it was back in September in the UK, where there was a mad panic in the government bond market, and everyone was it was basically forced sales, and it could have spiraled out of control if the Bank of England hadn't stepped in. But this could come from anywhere. Look how many times in history we've seen crises occur just with the UK alone. There was back in the 1990s, before the euro came into existence, Britain was struggling to keep the British pound within the band. It had to keep it within a certain band, and the more it struggled, the more it put up interest rates, until George Soros took a poke at the pound and said, I think I'm going to short this with a 20 billion bet or 10 billion bet against the pound. And they put up the interest rates to try and screw him over, but it didn't work. And the pound fell out of the ERM, and the pound collapsed something like 20% against the dollar and against the Deutschmark in one day. And of course, they could then put the interest rates back down, but the pound permanently remained at a lower level after that.
And how did that impact the population?
Well, everything costs more. It goes without saying, when your currency falls against another currency, it means your imported goods cost more, and therefore people start to demand pay rises because the inflation goes up. And now we're in a very funny world, because the level of printing of money has been off the radar screen in the last 20, 30 years.
Yes.
It's literally gone through the roof. And by historical standards, that would have sent prices going into hyperinflation. We haven't had hyperinflation. And the reason for that is we've got one of these miracles where they can print the money at one end, it flows through the system, stimulating the economy, which has been very good. But when it comes out at the other end, someone, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, the government of China, puts it in their pocket and keeps it. And that's great, as long as they keep it and don't spend it. But the situation will not be so good if they start to want to spend that money. And wealthy individuals now are starting to say, I don't want to keep all my wealth in cash. I mean, they never did, but they don't want quite as much as they kept in cash. And that's why the price of rare Van Goghs are going to all-time records, and just about anything rare and unusual, which is hard to lay your hands on, is hitting new records at every auction sale. That because people are trying to deploy their money. And we only have to see what the government of China is trying to do. The government of China is trying to unload its dollars. So they're going around the world trying to buy tin mines in Indonesia. They're buying railways in Africa. They're buying pharmaceutical companies in Switzerland. They can't buy anything in America because the minute they try to buy anything in America, they're told, oh, sorry, that's within 150 miles of one of our military bases. You can't buy it. But basically, they're trying to get shot of as many dollars as they can, but the trouble is it's coming in at one end very, very fast, and they're trying to spend it, and it's not easy to spend that much money quickly.
That's true. And since you brought up inflation, let's kind of go there, because rapid inflation is kind of an alert system for the general public to say, something's going on here. If they can keep it at that 2%, then they're still getting what they want, just at a slower pace. But this rapid inflation, now, what do you think? We're hearing soft landing. We're hearing maybe this time we'll avoid a recession, even at the same time that we have the global current yield curve inversion, not just in the different countries. And what is your feeling? Do you think that they're really getting control of inflation, or just your thoughts on that, please?
So the CPI index is dominated by a number of things, and one of them is, or in the background, are commodity prices. Now, commodity prices shot up a lot last year after the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And all those commodity prices are way, way down from the peaks we saw in May, June, July last year, which means those very high numbers are going to drop out of the inflation index by about the middle of this year or towards the end of this year. Okay. So it's entirely conceivable that high inflation we saw in the USA, in Europe, will go back down, at least at the headline number, when we're looking at it from a year-to-year basis. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I don't think inflation has gone away, because inflation isn't really the rise in consumer prices. Inflation is the inflation of the money supply, or the total fiat mass as defined by the totality of government debt and money in circulation. Right. So that's at quite a high level. I haven't got the latest numbers, but I think about a year ago it was running at about 13 to 15% a year, and had been for many years, which obviously is way higher than the consumer price index was running at the time. I don't know where it is as of today. But it has been quite high. So that means if you're a wealthy person and you have money in the bank and you're earning less than that 13 to 15% that they're creating the money at, you are going backwards. Right. So wealthy people are seeing whilst their cash balance might look like it's going up because they're earning 4% interest or whatever they're getting, their relative share of all the money and cash and government bonds which are in circulation is going down. They're going backwards. So they're getting poorer relatively compared with the next rich guy who hasn't put his money into government bonds or hasn't put his money into cash.
Well, that's why you're going into hard assets. right? That's
Correct.
why they're putting their money in their hard assets. That's the dynastic wealth piece. But do you think?
And we're
no, go ahead, please.
Sorry, thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt. We're seeing central banks like India, China, and others buying a lot of gold at the moment.
Yes.
The reason they're doing that is because if something breaks in the financial system of the world as it is, it'll be time for a new global monetary system. And those who have the most gold will get a seat at the table and possibly call the shots.
I get a lot of people ask me when they do those overnight resets where they revalue the currency against gold and then gold starts to express to its true value. I mean, you've been in the belly of the beast a long time managing for very wealthy clients. Do you believe what you see on Wall Street? I mean, like spot gold, spot silver, spot anything, frankly.
I've been following the price of gold since I was, I won't say I was following the price because it was not possible to follow the price of gold, but since I was a child, I first acquired my first piece of gold, which was a sovereign from my granddad. I'll tell you a little story. When I was about 6 years old, my granddad put in front of me a £1 note and a bar of chocolate and asked me in front of his friends which one I'd like. Now, being a 6-year-old, I took the bar of chocolate, not knowing really what a pound note was. Now, what I obviously didn't realize at the time that a bar of chocolate cost sixpence. That's 6 old pence, not the new pence. And that meant you could buy 40 bars of chocolate with £1. Now, you do realize today it'd be kind of difficult to buy a bar of chocolate with £1. You'd need more than that to buy even one. But I took the wrong solution. I took the bar of chocolate and everybody laughed and I learned my lesson. So when I came back to my granddad's a year later, he wanted to play the same trick on me and he put in front of me the pound note, the bar of chocolate and a £1 gold sovereign from the 1920s, I believe it was, and asked me which one I liked. Well, I knew that banknotes were worth more than coins, but I had no idea what a gold sovereign was. So, and I knew a banknote, the pound note, was worth more than a bar of chocolate by now because I'd learned from my previous experience. So I took the pound note, and my grandfather found that terribly amusing, and his friends who were around there didn't understand what was so funny because they didn't know what a gold sovereign was either. They'd never seen one. My grandfather actually worked for HMRC, the government tax authority, so he'd seen a lot of different types of assets, and he also had a very tiny portfolio of some shares and things. So he was a little bit unusual compared with the man in the street who wouldn't own gold, wouldn't own shares. But he did have this gold sovereign. They weren't making them anymore by then. They'd stopped making them, I don't know, back in the 1920s, because they were trying to run the economy on silver money and banknotes. But anyway, he had one. But a few years later, he gave me that sovereign. And perhaps I was 14 years old. And he said, Clive, keep this forever. And so I still have it today. It's tucked away in my safe somewhere in at my bank. I never sold it. But in terms of inflation, I did look it up recently. Well, I looked up twice. Back in 1975, I went along to one of the gold bullion dealers in London when I started work. It's called Sharps Pixley, and asked them what they'd give me for it. I think they said they'd give me £10 for it, but they had another one if I wanted to buy it, and it was going to cost me £25. I don't remember those prices.
That's a pretty big spread.
Yeah, well, we must remember Britain was on exchange controls, and I'm not even sure it's legal to own sovereigns back then, but anyway, it was on exchange controls, and so we had what's called the dollar premium, which meant there were two prices for the pound. There was a price overseas, and there was a price in the UK, completely different, which meant that whenever you had a tangible asset like a piece of gold, the prices of buying and sell had to be hugely apart. Otherwise, there'd be a lot of smuggling across the border to capture it.
I see. Okay. I didn't know that. Thank you. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. Very interesting.
So, my mother, back then, when I was a child, would sometimes go to work for the United Nations. She was what they call a stenotypist. And it made sense to, when she got her pay, to convert it into British pounds outside the UK, which was obviously illegal, but we're talking about 60 years ago here, and mail it to her mother saying, dear mum, here's the £5 I owe you. Because that meant the £5 would have cost her a lot less in Switzerland than it would have cost her in UK if she changed her Swiss francs in the UK at the official exchange rate.
Interesting.
So, we had a dual currency system back then, just as kind of existed in the USA after you weren't allowed to own any gold. You couldn't actually buy the gold, but the price was completely different from the official rate of $20 as it was supposed to have been since the beginning of time.
Right. Well, I think that's interesting. So you still have that gold sovereign today. I actually have sovereigns. I like them. In my personal strategy, I use them for property taxes. That's the intention. I don't use them right now, but that's what I'm accumulating them for. So they
say it's the most popular coin in the world. James Bond always used to carry sovereigns with him wherever he went in the world, because everywhere in the world people would take them and they were recognized.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing about gold and silver coins is, this is what date is this? This happens to be a 1914, but that's the thing. You can take it anywhere in the world and it has that same level of purchasing power value, which is why it's so critical. And especially, we're watching things fall apart. I had a similar experience when, not quite like that, but I also had an experience with gold when I was 10. So that would have been 1964, when it was illegal in this country to have more than 5 ounces, but had an antique dealer uncle who he'd go into wealthy households and they would have these gold coins, and he probably bought them at whatever the official rate was at that time. And he had 2 huge floor safes. And I remember him telling my parents if anything happened to Aunt Bertie, his wife, that she would be well taken care of for the rest of her life because of what's in here. And so, when you're young like that, you don't really understand the lesson until you have some age on you, and then you can look back and go, oh, I'm so grateful that I had that, because similar to what you were talking about, I have a $1 gold coin. So back in 1900, you had a $1 gold coin, you had a $1 bill, you had a silver dollar, you'd buy 11 loaves of bread. Recently, I did a thing, and so I got the price of the current $1 gold coin, what the current price was, and it'd buy me like 133 loaves of bread or something ridiculous like that. But, what does that $1 bill buy you in terms of loaves of bread? Maybe a third of a loaf if you're lucky, something like that. So I think you've been groomed for this moment in time as well, to have had that experience that you're working on sharing. And we're looking at, I personally think this is going to be a global reset because we're all intertwined. And we see what's happening in Lebanon. We see what's happening in Nigeria. And Nigeria, I think, is particularly interesting in that they weren't getting good adoption of their CBDC. So by demonetizing all the large bills, which aren't very large anyway, are they trying to force that adoption? Or what is your feeling on what you're seeing in these emerging markets?
Well, we're obviously in places like Lebanon. We can see they're burning the banks in rage because the banks won't give them their money. People had deposited their money in the Lebanese banks, and they were earning a pretty high interest rate until they couldn't give it back to you. I think you could get 14% on US dollars in a Lebanese bank 2 years ago. But now they won't give it back. They don't have the money. The population thinks the government is corrupt. The population thinks the government has been taking bribes and God knows what else. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But basically, the population are starving. They can't get money out of the banks. They can't buy oil to even cook their food. It's a problem. And people are saying, well, perhaps it won't happen here, but it could happen anywhere if there is a certain level of distrust in the banks, or distrust in the government, or distrust in the currency, or if we have another banking crisis. I mean, we mustn't forget that commercial banks, which is the vast majority of them, are taking your money and my money and lending it to somebody that you personally and I personally wouldn't be willing to lend it to. For example, a spotty teenager who wants to buy an Xbox, or maybe his mum and dad. But either way, it wouldn't be what I'd be lending money for. I wouldn't be letting people run up huge bills on their credit cards, knowing that I could never get it back unless they can borrow more. So the day of reckoning from time to time does come individually in banks, and sometimes it comes in all the banks at the same time. And when that happens, you might worry if you kept too much money in the bank and you haven't got other things to spend.
Mm-hmm. So what are you doing to avoid that?
The magic trick is to diversify into as many assets as possible, which are tangible. Suddenly, timing is everything. And I can't tell you if today is a better day to buy gold or stocks. It might be that gold will go up to 2,500 next week and stocks will drop to 20% next week. That's entirely possible. Or it could go the other way. And you don't know, I don't know. So this is why I don't put all the eggs in any one basket.
Right.
I think it makes sense to hedge your bets by having a bit of everything. Now, those who feel very strongly about a certain type of asset, maybe the gold and silver, can have more of it. And where I sit at the moment, I'm of the view that I should be increasing my exposure to gold relative to other things. So,
yes.
But it doesn't mean to say I'm on the route to having half my assets in gold or even a quarter of my assets in gold. You have to have the amount which is right for each individual. And the amount which is right for each individual will vary according to their own situation. Some people have very little money and it probably doesn't make sense to have any gold at all. Other people perhaps have got a few thousand in the bank and they could probably afford silver coins rather than gold. And so it can go on. And a man who's got many, many millions perhaps would like 10 or 20% of his assets in gold if he feels that the system is about to reset. Certainly the central banks are taking that view by trying to have as much gold as they can, at least some of the central banks. But then maybe they don't want stocks. The one central bank which does have stocks is the Swiss central bank. But in general, they like, but don't forget the Swiss central bank has an awful lot of gold relative to other countries and always has had a lot of gold. So perhaps that's the reason they went into stocks, whereas some of the other countries relative to their GDP didn't have quite as much gold. So they're on a mission to build up their gold reserves.
Well, I think when we look at, because certainly Japan has been quite active through different arms. They can call it all different things, but I think it's more about supporting the markets because that's what people look at. People don't really look at the gold. And do you think that gold is fairly valued where it is right now? Or do you think the stock market fully values it? Yeah.
Let me show you a chart of something, if I may.
Certainly.
So this is something I produced a few weeks ago. It's it's not back to front. Can you see it the right way round, Lynette?
Yes, I can see it the right way.
So this is from 90. It's in British pounds, but the same principle would apply in dollars and other currencies. It's how much gold you could have bought from 1971 to today with £10,000. So in 1971, you could have bought 635 ounces of gold with your £10,000, British pounds. Some 29 years later, by 2000, it shows here, you could have bought 63 and a half ounces, 1/10 as much. after 20 years. Now we are 23 years later, and you can buy, it says 6.5 ounces of gold. It's actually now 6.35 ounces. It's 1/100th of the amount of gold you could have bought with £10,000 back in 1971. So the British pound has lost 99% of its buying value in pound terms. Yep. And if we look at the chart in American dollars, you'll see the situation. It's not exactly the same position, but it's more or less in the same direction.
It is.
It's on the way. The currencies have lost most of their buying power. They're on the way to zero. And we are probably entering the final phase now because government debt as a percentage of GDP has reached very high levels. It's 130% in the USA. That is way beyond the level which was thought sustainable by the USA itself back of 70%. It's way beyond the level set by in the Maastricht Treaty for European countries of 60%. Of course, all European countries are way beyond 60% of GDP now. And that level of debt of the government relative to GDP is getting larger. Mm-hmm. So it means that the debt is not rising with inflation. It's rising faster than inflation. Right. And it also means that now we go into a phase of higher interest rates. The servicing costs are going to start increasing. Now, it will take a decade for those service costs to spiral out of control because a lot of the government debt is issued for more than 10 years. Mm-hmm. It's issued for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way through to 50 years in some cases. But over the next decade, if interest rates were to stay where they are, the servicing costs of the national debt will just become unserviceable. It'll take all of the taxes and beyond, and they'll have no choice but to not only borrow to repay the principal, they'll have to borrow to repay the interest, which is happening to some extent already. Oh, yes, but it will just become wilder and wilder. I think for currencies in Western governments, Western countries, we're on our last legs. And obviously the plan is to keep kicking the can down the road, keep inflating away and hoping that nothing breaks. But clearly the danger is that something breaks, and it has broken in many less developed countries, in some cases multiple times, like Brazil, for example. But we only have to look at how many zeros they had on some of the banknotes in Europe before we got the euro. I remember when you went on holiday in Italy, it was very hard to know if you're getting ripped off, if you're dealing with a 10 million note or a 1 million note or a 100,000 note. You couldn't really tell the difference. And of course, gas station attendants loved it when a foreigner who was unfamiliar with the notes turned up because you didn't know what you'd handed them and your change was never right.
Right. Yeah. I've experienced that. But, I'm not 100% convinced that they're really trying to kick the can down the road as far as, they're basically out of tools. They're trying to raise the rates so they can lower them again, but that's going to create a problem. Pardon?
So I just bring my picture back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, central banks are out of tools because the key tool are interest rates. And, so they've broken that trend line of downward sloping interest rates. Now we're going up. Something is breaking. And I think they know that. And as you pointed out so aptly, I don't care whether you're in Great Britain or you're in the USA or you're anywhere else in the world, the fiat money system, the currency has no purchasing power left. It only has viability because of public confidence, right? So we're still willing to work for it and use it as our tool of barter. But when that shifts, that's when I think we'll see the hyperinflation. But beyond that, I really think that central bankers know that this is the end of this road. So maybe what they're attempting is a planned demolition rather than a kicking the can down the road. I think the last kick was started in 2008. I think that's when the system, I'm convinced, that's when the system died. So... But
I think I certainly think there are some people who are in control of our financial system who actually have made up their minds to go in that direction. Whether they'll be able to do it without being forced to stop by the respective governments who don't know it's about to happen, I think, we'll see. But you've definitely got a point that there could be a plan afoot to restart the system by destroying it.
Right. So, for me, financial shields are made of metals. Everybody knows I'm way more than 50%. And I do agree with you. I definitely am a tangible gal and have no problem with holding my wealth in something that's real.
So when people buying silver or gold, I would say you need to buy smart. That means dealing with reputable dealers and or if you're going peer-to-peer, make sure you're only buying for a price at which you think you could sell it for. With the dealer, you'll pay more, and that's justified because you have the reassurance that you're dealing with a reputable company and not going to sell you a fake, which is harder to know when you're dealing peer-to-peer.
I think there's enough of us around, and I definitely can echo, you want to work with somebody not just that's reputable, but also is going to be there. Right? You need to know that they're going to be there. So when you're buying, you're paying a reasonable price. And when you're liquidating at a reasonable price. But beyond that, because it isn't all about the current fiat price, since we know the truth about the fiat currency, it's also about having a plan. Because clearly those in power have a plan. And I think everybody needs to have a plan for how they're going to walk through this. The other area that I'm personally diversified in is food, water, energy, security, as well as barterability and anything physical is barterable. Any talent you have is barterable. Wealth preservation, creating community, which is what this is about for me, and shelter. Because these are the things that no matter what happens, whether you're right or whether you're wrong, these are the things that we all need to sustain a reasonable standard of living and weather this financial storm that is already upon us, that we've already started to walk through. And this has been great fun, and I really appreciate you coming because I know you're in Switzerland. The time difference is a little bit challenging from time to time, but thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And I hope all the viewers got as much out of this as I did. And until next we meet, remember, your financial shields are made of metal, not paper or promises or the ability to print.
I got to get one of those.
We'll get you one. We'll get you one. Until next we meet, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Lynette.
Thank you.